Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Ratni heroj, jedinac i izgubljeni dečak. Pre svog 20. rođendana uspeo je da preživi Vijetnamski rat sa 2 odlikovanja za hrabrost. Yale je napustio bez univerzitetske diplome, roditeljski dom bez iluzije da će se njegovi roditelji ikada više pomiriti, a život u Francuskoj sa tečnim poznavanjem jezika i iskustvom uličnog prodavca.
The winner is Oliver Stone!
Ovaj mladić će u narednih 40 godina osvojiti 3 Oskara, napisati i režirati neke od najvažnijih i najboljih filmova u istoriji ove umetnosti, u međuvremenu postati otac, deda i budista, kao i vatreni fan Uga Chaveza. I kako ga je britanski Observer nedavno nazvao, poslednji istinski levičar Hollywooda. A sada postaje i alternativni TV istoričar Sjedinjenih Država, u kojoj svega 12% srednjoškolaca poznaje istoriju svoje domovine. Oliver Stone u svojoj 66. godini ima novu misiju, da razbije, kako je naziva, sterilnu Disney verziju američke istorije i svojim sunarodnicima kaže u lice: ne možete uvek imati loptu u svojim rukama, a još manje svaki put postići pogodak.
Mr. Stone, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. Thank you so much for talking to us. We're here in Zagreb, in Subversive Festival. So I guess I would say a logical question to ask you is, calling somebody subversive in 2013, is it considered a compliment or an insult?
Well, in my case, I think it's a compliment. I think the word means that you're questioning the established order of things.
You comfortable with that? You've been
I
doing it
always
for a
have been
while.
questioning the orthodox viewpoint. Ever since the 1980s, when I first appeared on the scene, I've been, and I saw what Ronald Reagan was doing with America, and I saw the wars in Central America that he promoted against the reform movements, against the poor. It bothered me greatly, and although I had a background in Vietnam, I changed my thinking. I was raised conservative, I was raised Republican, I was raised very much a believer in the American empire, in fighting communism, and I changed quite a bit in the 1980s, because I saw that the word communism was being used in a broad sense against poor people, people without privilege, reform, labor union, teachers. These are the people who are being hurt in Central America.
This is what I'm trying to understand. You said on various occasions that you spent first 40 years of your life basically sleepwalking, and you had one of those amazing lives when it seems you live a couple of lives within one lifespan. You said no to Yale, you went to Vietnam, you came back as literally a hero and you have medals to prove it. Then you reinvented yourself as one of the most original screenplayers ever hitting the Hollywood. Then you created all these incredible movies, and now you consider to be one of the few remaining, sorry if I'm saying this, leftists in Hollywood. One of the few ones that are really pushing the agenda. When you look at your life, do you see as a couple of lives crammed in one, or you would just your journey?
Well, for me, it's been one life, but you have to realize life in the sense of, you change through your life. You go through, all your cells are replaced in your body every few years. You have a different face. Essentially, your face changes. Your thinking changes. Often, it's hard to remember who you were. Yes, I remember the outlines of the boy that I was. I remember my thinking to some degree. But I'm sure the impression I made on other people was quite different than I do now. So I think memory is a tricky thing. And, I do feel strongly that I was orthodox and conformist. I had, for the most part. And I was scared. I grew up scared. I was nervous. We had the atomic bomb.
Can you explain to our viewers, when you say I was raised as an Eisenhower Republican, what it actually means?
My father was a soldier in World War II, and he was a stockbroker, and he was a conservative means conservative. He was against change, essentially against the wrong kinds of change, and he saw the world as American power as being necessary to the world. America was the good guy. America had the right to dictate the agenda of the world. We were the richest country. we'd won World War II. All these myths I was born with, and I went to Vietnam on the belief that we were fighting communism.
You were part of the 60s in a sense that they were your formative years, but at the same time, 60s were very crucial to you in a sense, and you referred to it throughout several interviews. 1962 was, you had a very serious heartbreak that took you a very long time to go over. From this point of view and where you're sitting, how do you look at the moment when you, and I'm sorry if I'm being over the top saying this, lost the innocence by witnessing the relationship your father and mother had fell apart?
I was a child of divorce. I was the only child, and it was my only knowledge of family. And it was a strange family because we weren't as close as some people, other families had been. So in 1962, when my parents divorced, I was 16 years old. I was essentially on my own at that point because my father stayed in New York. I was in boarding school. My mother disappeared in Europe for a long time. So I went off and I was on my own. I felt alone in the world and nervous, scared, and I ended up in Vietnam alone. And I found my way through a very messy situation. And the war in Vietnam sort of became the military became a new parent for me. And I went back to Vietnam in '67 as a soldier, infantry soldier. Very torn about the war, very alienated from what I saw. I was just very ashamed of what we were doing, the bombs, and we were the bullies. We had all the weaponry. We were the airplanes. We had controlled the skies, and yet these people, these dogged people, these people never gave up, and you couldn't kill them enough. I mean, they just kept coming back. It was highly disturbing to see what the things I saw in Vietnam. I came back to an America that was torn apart, same way that every platoon combat platoon I was in was torn apart. People were for it or they were against it. There was a lack of understanding of what the Vietnamese people were fighting for, which was independence from a corrupt government and from us, from the US. So all these things kick in, but I don't change right away. It's just like I come back from the war and I'm a different person. I'm confused. It takes me more years. The 1970s, Watergate, Nixon is fired from, he resigns, and corruption. And I see the Church Committee hearings that reveal the CIA's penetration of third world countries to be worldwide, our intervention in other countries, our changing governments, pursuing American interests. This becomes more and more evident. The corruption of the world, the viewing of the world as American-centric becomes very important to my understanding. And by 1980, when I'm 40 years old, approximately, no, I'm not 40 yet, but about 1980, when Reagan comes into office, I voted for him because I thought he brought order and common sense to a world that made no sense. But by 1984, I'm almost 40 years old, I go down to Central America with Richard Boyle, who became my co-author on Salvador, the movie I first made in 1986. I saw another world. I saw American troops all over Central America, again, practicing the same policies we practiced in Vietnam, which is repression.
One of the things that I was very interested in is that during the time span of just a couple of years, you became a boy that said no to Yale, to war-decorated soldier, rediscovering the world as the age of innocence, if we're referring to the 60s, were ending. JFK was gone year after your parents' divorce. So I guess there was a lot of turmoil, the civil movement in America as well. How do you remember that decade?
I described the 1960s in the Untold History of the United States. It's chapter 6 as the punches to the stomach. It was the Kennedy murder grows in importance the more you study it, because he was truly committed to change after the missile crisis. Khrushchev, the Russian premier, and him were really beginning to connect, and they saw the world as changeable. It had to be changed to move away from the Cold War to a lasting peace. And if he'd been reelected, Kennedy would have definitely moved in that direction, even more so. Khrushchev also was, because of his relationship with Kennedy, was removed from office eventually, within a year. So there was a great moment of change. It was a wonderful freedom. It was in the air, but it was destroyed with his murder.
Most of the people who view this, who are watching this interview, basically know you through your movies.
Yeah.
And just your catalog, I don't know if that's the right word, but all the movies you have made have been seen by pretty much everybody who was exposed to the TV set or movie screen anywhere in the world. You were perceived as a storyteller. Did you came to Hollywood in order to be a storyteller?
Yeah.
Was that something you envisioned your life would be?
Yeah, I always viewed myself, first of all, as a dramatist, and I still do. I dramatize. That's what I can do. I was able to write, I was able to picture. And I told the movies, and then eventually I told more and more progressive movies. I think it started with Salvador in 1986. And I reached a place in 2008 when, having made 19 movies, I wanted to go further with the history of the United States. I wanted to make it as a documentary, a classic documentary, no talking heads, narration, archive footage, movie clips, music that would be beautiful, poetry to it, to tell the history of the United States that I knew from 1940 to now. And I committed myself for 5 years with Peter Kuznick, a professor of history at American University, to tell that story and tell it from the way I learned it afterward.
Oh my God,
After
you
40.
did. And you did.
It goes back to the beginning, because I grew up, as I said, nervous, fearful. I grew up, my father, you know, they talk about conspiracy theories, but my father was a beautiful, strong man and an educated man. He went to Yale. But he was crazy. He was talking about a Russian conspiracy to take over the world, to destroy the United States. Russia and China were coming after us. I mean, he believed the convention of the time, which was what American propaganda put out, that America was under threat. America was far more powerful than Russia. Russia was devastated by World War II. Russia had won World War II, had destroyed the German war machine. We took the credit for winning the war. We took the credit for dropping the atomic bombs to win the war, which was a tragedy and an awful thing to do. We didn't have to drop the bomb. All these things I believed.
But Mr. Stone, as soon as your series was shown on Showtime in the US, it created such a commotion that on some level you pretty much expected. But actually the point you make in your series, when you're saying that there was absolutely no need for the atomic bomb, otherwise to impress Stalin, it came as a huge shock to the academic community in the US, and you were fiercely criticized. How did you take that?
Sure, well, we knew that we would, listen, they've been teaching that myth for my lifetime and my daughter's lifetime. I have 3 children, they've all learned this story. What we did was go into the details, and that's what you always have to go to details. And we showed 2 things. We showed that the Japanese were desperately seeking to surrender after Okinawa. They knew it was over. How to get the best terms mattered to them. They wanted to keep the emperor. That was sacred to them, keeping the emperor. We said no. There were no conditions. They turned to the Soviet Union to make a deal. The Soviet Union could have made a separate deal, but the Soviet Union kept its treaty with the United States and invaded Manchuria and Japan. Now, that's a huge thing. It's very important to understand. The Soviet army was ferocious. They had destroyed Germany. And look what they did to Germany. They raped and they killed and they were brutal.
You refer to JFK as the guy who had one of the most courageous moves in the circumstances that he
Absolutely.
was.
At the height of the missile crisis, the military was pushing for a nuclear war. They were pushing to invade Cuba. They were on the island of Cuba. The Soviets had about far more missiles than we knew, and they were ready to counterattack us. It would have been the end of mankind as we know it. Kennedy and Khrushchev understood how far they came, and they both said we're losing control of the military. Eisenhower, the previous president, told Kennedy to invade. All his chief of staff were for the invasion. It was very gutsy for Kennedy to say no. And after his 2 years of office, he understood, he said how stupid the military was, how stupid these generals were. And he said the CIA should be crushed. He said the CIA should be broken into 1,000 pieces. These are things he said. Now, this is not romanticized by me. Okay? Even Harry Truman, who started the CIA, came out with an article in 1963 after Kennedy was killed saying that we have created a Gestapo in the United States. This article appeared and it vanished. It vanished from the media, but it did appear. So things like that are not romantic. We are putting them on this is the untold history of the United States. We want kids to understand that presidents in this country have moved at various times to change the curve of the ball, to change history.
So, talking about your movie career, Robin Williams famously describes Scarface as a freaking documentary. And JFK is one of those movies that pretty much still creates controversy because most of the people think it's absolute truth, and you're one of the guys who actually...
I didn't say it was absolute truth. It's a historical drama. Well, I gave what I said was my view of what happened that day, but I never claimed that it was true. The documentary that we did, Untold History, that is a documentary. That is fact-checked. 3 times we fact-checked it. So there is a different story. One's a documentary, the other one's a historical drama. Please make the difference.
Yeah. And since your father was a stockbroker, you made one of the quintessential movies about greed. First of all, in the 80s, and then you returned to the theme in 2008 with Money Never Sleeps. So if you think about excess of the 80s, and you think of the life you lived in the 80s, I'm not gonna ask you about your personal excesses, but the thing that I'm interested in, we know how Gordon Gekko ended up in the first part, but you kindly gave the guy the happy end, or sort of a happy end in the second part, and you were criticized for that. Why do you think he deserved it, a happy end?
I think in 2010, there was such anger at Wall Street that they would not settle for anything less than a lynching of the business community. And when I acknowledged that Gordon Gekko got older and got more human because he had a daughter and he wanted to, you know, at one point it becomes a very strong battle between money and family. And at one point he screws his daughter over and he goes off with all the money to England to set up a new hedge fund. So the unsentimental ending would be Gekko just says screw the daughter and goes off. But the Shia LaBeouf character brings him a sonogram of the child that his daughter is going to have with him. And Gekko, of course, looks at first he says no, but then he's a human being, and there is such a thing as human ties, and we show Gekko giving in to the idea of having a grandchild and coming back to his daughter, with conditions, of course, because he is Gekko.
See, that's what you never got, kid. It's not about the money. It's about the game between people, and that's all it is.
The millions of dollars became billions of dollars. It got greedier, and the Gordon Gekkos became central banks. Part of the idea was that Gekko was no longer a pirate. He was replaced by the banks. The banks were now crooked, and they were doing what Gekko was doing in the 1980s. So a lot of those ironies were lost, but I'm very proud of the movie, and I loved it.
I was referring to the whole concept of greed that was reinvented again in the early 2000s.
It wasn't reinvented, it never went away. Greed just continued. From 1990s was horrible decade in terms of its deregulation, and allowed the business community to exploit the mortgage business completely and change the nature of business. Deregulation, the Glass-Steagall Act, the deregulation of banks was one of the worst things that ever happened to this country. Allowing banks to engage in profit making at this investment banking was to change the nature of banks. This was the whole concept of conglomeration from Sandy Weill, and the brokerage houses were no longer brokerage houses. They were insurance houses. They were investment banks. They could invest in, they could own corporate credit card companies. The whole concept of business gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Too big to fail they should be allowed to fail. Yeah. And this is a problem in Europe. We were talking about the Eurozone, because now the same thing is going on in Europe. It's been Americanized in the sense that all of a sudden you have a union, everybody has the same currency, and we can't allow Greece to fail. We can't allow Spain to fail. So all of a sudden, the concept of failure, when you start to raise the concept of failure, you know one thing, it will fail. So Germany will fail ultimately, and then there will be this huge crisis. Everything is bound to fail once you raise the issue of too big to fail. Nothing is too big to fail. Nothing.
We're in extremely...
But don't get so big that you will fail. Stay small. Go back to our smaller countries. Go back to the separate denominations. It may be less convenient for trade, but in the end is a stronger basis for a healthy world, a healthy regional balance. I always emphasize regional balance. The United States is too strong. We need to be balanced by China, Russia, Turkey, Brazil, Venezuela.
You see, that's the reason why you literally said, I cannot stand her, when you were referring to Hillary Clinton, because she, in what you referred to as in one of your interviews, said that she considers China to be an enemy.
The new threat, yeah. She considers the United States. She says very simply, she's a dope in the sense that she says, okay, the United States has done such a great job of running the world since World War II. There's been no other world war. That's what she said. She doesn't take into account all the misery.
Yeah, but she still said that American century that we are living out is going to be American pacifist century.
She said the 21st century will be the American Pacific century. She's arrogant and a dope. She doesn't have any sense of empire. Empires end. Every empire has ended. Do you think the United States is any different because we're exceptional? That we have, because of our belief in our screwed up history, because Hillary Clinton believes the atomic bomb is the best thing to control the world?
Yeah, but Mr. Stone, when you say that, it doesn't come across too nice to your fellow Americans. So do you think, in a way, with those sort of stands, you are almost putting a question mark over a brilliant career if you have this sort of interviews and being so open and truthful?
You think I've jeopardized my career? Perhaps so.
Or legacy, maybe.
Perhaps so. Listen, I'd rather be hated for what I am than loved for what I am not. I'm quoting St. Augustine. And I'm no fan of, by the way, but it's a good quote because it's accurate. I'd rather be known for what I stand for than to be misunderstood.
And it's very similar to what you said with your late friend, Hugo Chavez, who you lost recently. So you literally said that even in an eve of very difficult illness, he was still very content with the life he led.
He was a great man, and those who knew him will miss him greatly. I mean, it was a great spirit in the room.
Are you one of them?
Oh, yes. I missed him very much. And it's a loss to the world. The fact that he was so hated tells you that he means something. You know, listen, people like Jesus were hated when they were killed, too. You know, there are good people in the world. When they die, there's so much opposition. Chavez will be missed. His great spirit for Latin America. And he was independent of the United States. He took us on. He was not afraid to be bullied. He hated to be bullied. He was a soldier in his heart. Artists have to challenge the system because often the system is very oppressive and it's very subtle. In the United States, it's subtle. It's commercial. Movies have to make money, so artists are co-opted constantly. It's very hard for a filmmaker to stand for something. If he feels something in his heart, my century, my life has taught me the abuses of power, the excesses of power. I've seen the United States behave badly consistently throughout the world. It's my job to say it. I have to say it in a smart way that's entertaining, that's subtle. It's not easy. And sometimes I'm criticized in advance. My movies are criticized before anybody even bothers to see them. But I'm going to keep making those kind of movies. And if I can't make those movies, I'll make a documentary. And if I can't make a documentary, I'll write it.
You traveled extensively in the region. I mean, I know you've been in Belgrade, now you're in Zagreb. You spend quite a lot of time talking with various people. It would be interesting to hear your take on the Balkans, because it's, for us, it's a mystery and we're living in it. I can only imagine what's your feeling about it.
Well, certainly one of the heroes that in our history is Tito, because he does present a third way between communism and capitalism. He was he was underrated in his time by the U.S. We never even acknowledged the rift between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. We didn't acknowledge the power of the neutrality. And Tito, you remember, went to the 1955 Bandung conference. He was one of the founders of that conference with Sukarno and Abdel Nasser and Nehru of India. Very important figure, Tito. And it's interesting to see how he negotiates between the two worlds. And he's the only one that was not removed by the United States. All the others were removed by the United States because they didn't like neutrality. Neutrality, according to John Foster Dulles, was, quote, immoral. This was the world in the 1950s. So I admired Tito more and more. And obviously in Yugoslavia, when he died, you know, things did fall apart. And partly, you know, you have to look at where the Euro banks came into play here, the IMF, and their support of certain things that went on in this region that were nationalistic and dangerous.
When you look at your life and you look at the decisions you made, the road you went, do you think it was worth all the harsh criticism? And did you achieve with your work and your movies what did you want? Despite of sometimes very volatile, especially now with the internet, backlash.
I've learned to live with criticism more and more as I got older. I'm very proud of having done and achieved untold history of the United States. It took 5 years. It was pro bono. It was an assignment that took me further away from the movie business and into the documentary world. But I think I achieved something which I set out to do, which was to leave a document behind for my children.
What makes you hopeful?
I believe that in the newer generations, there will be new minds, new education, new levels of intelligence that will grasp the desire, the opportunities that exist by looking at our history clearly to understand the ways we went wrong and how we can do better.
When somebody in 15 years' time, some 13-year-old from Arizona, goes online and watches your series, what would you like for him or her to take from it?
There's 1,000 lessons in the history. I mean, you know, you have to deal with what it is first, what happened. When Obama in 2008 said, look to the future, not to the past, he's wrong. You have to come clean with the past. And Obama should have looked to the past because he continued the age of terror instead of putting it behind us.
Are you disappointed?
I am. In him, but not the future.
Thank you so much.
Okay.